And finally, stage 8 of instructional design is the evaluation stage. So not only are we evaluating the actual materials and resources that have been developed, did the trainer find them easy to use? Did the learners like using them? Did they contain the right information? Was it done at the right level? Was there any mistakes in them? The list goes on. There's a bunch of things that you need to be checking with the resources. But we also want to be looking at feedback. So we want to be looking at the learner's feedback and the trainer's feedback about the program. Perhaps there's a different way it could be delivered. Perhaps the content wasn't quite right or the level of focus wasn't quite right. We also want to be looking at the actual progress made towards the learning objectives that were set for the particular program. So we need to have our standard pre and post course assessments. That's something that we need to have developed as part of the development phase, is these assessments and evaluations that were going to be used to assess the program's effectiveness. So by assessing people against their skills, knowledge, competencies, feelings and attitudes at the beginning, which are aligned to the learning outcomes, and then again assessing them at the end, we're given a very clear indication as to the effectiveness of the training program. Now, if your training providers or your in-house training doesn't take those measurables, how on earth do you know if it's working? These are essential measurables to work out not only whether the return on investment is actually there when it comes to a training intervention, but also to show the effectiveness and the progress towards what it is that you set out to achieve in the first place. Now, another fantastic method of assessment here that I really love to use in training is what's called ipsative assessment. Now, your normal forms of pre and post course assessment generally look at your competency assessment. So what skills have increased or improved during the training program. Ipsative assessment is quite different in that you assess the learner's endpoint from their own starting point. So you get the learner to self-assess, because actually one tiny step for one person was a tiny step. For another, that tiny step was absolutely humongous. So where on a traditional assessment they might have only moved up 1 bar, on a self-assessment they may have moved up 10. So by comparing their ipsative assessment, their own assessment of their own starting point to their own finish point, with the quantitative data that you collect, you actually get a really true reflection of the effectiveness of the training program at a number of levels, both quantitative and qualitative. Now again, we have templates for those, and we also provide training on how you can develop those within your business yourself. So do get in touch if you're interested. Another thing to look at is the appropriateness of the intervention and indeed whether or not the strategic objectives are closer to being met as a result of putting it on. So there we conclude the final 8 steps of instructional training, design and development.